right. Well, we've got Jared Craig with us today. He's an attorney. He's also the president of the Georgia Veterans for America First. Jared, welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Hey, tell us what part of the state you're from.
I'm located in the Coweta County area. I live right on the border of Coweta and Fayette, almost Tyrone, if you know that area. And we're I say in the heart of Georgia. We're far enough away from Atlanta that we don't have the scourge of the Atlanta. I'll just say scourge. But we're also close enough to where we can, get to an international airport. I jokingly say that I live where golf courses hit cattle farms, and Coweta County has cow in its name, and I was raised on a cattle farm myself, so I'm right here outside suburbia, but real close.
Awesome. Well, one of the things we love to do at Editorial Interchange is highlight local economies. So we always ask the people we interview if they would like to give a locally owned business in their area a shout out. Do you have anything in mind?
There's a new place. A guy had a food truck for a while, and he put in a restaurant just across from my law office in Coweta County, and it's Skinny's Bar and Grill. And I'm not skinny, but they let me eat there. Uh, but they have the best Brunswick stew, and because they're just across the street, they are seeing me as often as my own mother.
Well, good. I've lived not far away, so I might have to go try that. If you're in the
It's
Coweta
definitely worth
County
it.
area, Fayette County area, yeah, go try it.
It's
Hey,
fantastic.
give us a little bit of history on your background.
Okay. My personal background, I'm born and raised. My family's been in the Coweta County area for a long time. We go back, I think I'm the fifth generation on our cattle farm. And we're a mixture between, hands-on farmers and I would say we have a mixture between mechanics, farmers, and lawyers. And that sounds like the beginning of a joke. But we've been out for a good long time and we are conservative, large family. We have large families with bunches of kids, and we raise them outside. And I was raised outside. And, with that being said, I'm a product of the public school system in Georgia. I went to East Coweta High School, went to West Georgia or University of West Georgia. I finished up my bachelor's degree there after spending a time at the London School of Economics. And then I came back and got my law degree, which led me to open up a small practice in Coweta County where I serve central Georgia. And if it's an exciting case, I'll travel. But primarily, I'm in the South Metro area between Muskogee and Fayette County. Um, I have a small family, and I'm invested in the area. I've got several businesses. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. As some people say, you go to the grocery store and you can't get out of there because you run into three cousins. That's my family in Coweta County area. I guess that's my background. I got into politics at a certain point I say in 2022, when I started reacting to the Ossoff and Warnock Senate races. And I got involved because I was upset with unqualified people up and down the ticket holding these jobs and they didn't know what they were doing. This is at the time when they were arguing over should we read the bill that we vote on. And I realized that the majority of the people in DC that are our representatives or senators really rely on their advisors. They rely on too many people to do their jobs, and we had too many gimmick candidates out there. And gimmick candidates from, Raphael Warnock coming from inner city, helping the homeless, quote unquote, which he didn't. John Ossoff, that guy's just a shill. He's really not even a Georgia resident. He's a transplant from, I think, California. And with the 2020 election and then the pandemic and all this, I felt like I had to do more than simply what I was doing at home. And all of my friends and family said, get out and make a statement. And I decided to run for U.S. Congress. I ran for U.S. Congress in 2022, and I was really preparing for a second run. That was my name recognition race. And the second run, I changed gears because after I lost, I realized I could do more without an elected position than I could had I been elected. So I joined forces with some of the groups of people that had endorsed me in my race, one of which was Veterans for Trump. At that time, that was the name had transferred from Veterans for Trump to Veterans for America First. And what we were doing at that point was educating the voters as to what the candidates or who they were, what their experiences were. Because if you listen to their own platform and their own commercials, they'll tell you anything. But we wanted to be the voice of who they actually were, so voters could rely on us. And I jumped on both feet and I went up and down the East Coast with the Trump bus with the John Frederick show, I guess to plug him as well. And we went from North Carolina to Maine and back, trying to find conservative Republicans where they said they didn't exist. We were told we were going to find Bigfoot before we found conservative Republicans in Connecticut, New Hampshire, and we found them. And I was referred to as the little mean guy in so many words because I was coming up into the North with my Southern accent, and all the little ladies wanted to hear me talk like, Opie from Mayberry. And I was telling them to kick their blue-haired, nose-pierced kids out of their basement. And they were like, "We expected you to say all kinds of, biscuits and gravy and sweet tea type of conversations, and you're telling us that we need to kick our parasite children, failure to launch adult children out of our basements." And it was really, do you have to choose to eat or heat? Then you've got a decision to make. So with that being said, I became very entrenched as I'll say the one of the mouthpieces of our organization. One, because I talk a lot, as you can guess. A little long winded as a lawyer. I'll take that. But I try to add substance to what I'm saying. I try to avoid filler phrases and gimmick phrases because we have a limited time to get things done. And I was really gung ho about getting the veterans bills passed to get the bills that were harming veterans or restricting veterans or taking resources that were meant for veterans and putting them back where they were properly intended to be, and to take these restrictions like the red flag laws and to uh, take the prejudice that started to build against veterans and use that as a basis to bring the voters in the middle, the abandoned Democrats, the swing voters, the new voters, over to the logical side. And in doing so, bringing those that were abandoned by the far left party back to reason. I found so many Democrat or self proclaimed Democrats that realized that they weren't truly, as I'm watching my mouth, crazy as the Democratic leaders were promoting the party to be with the transgender, LGBTQXY, MS-13 groups, promoting all of that. That was not really every Democrat's um, interest, and they were looking at economic things. So I have been a integral part in vetting candidates at state and federal level. I have been integral in assisting grassroots candidates with resources or guidance to tell them what they might not know that they need to know, if that makes any sense. And different people have different needs versus mailers versus messaging and different things. And because of that activity and not trying to make a dollar off of it, that's how you actually get somewhere is one, knowing what the heck you're talking about, two, not trying to gouge people and grift off of it, and three, being consistent. That has led our organization to have some integrity to where we could be relied upon. So when the 2024 election came around, we had already entrenched ourselves with the GOP in states and counties, and the national organization is aware of what we've been doing because there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of things for self-interest, and we separate ourselves from any of those. I'll just say other people, and we've been attacked left and right. And with that being said, the veterans, I'm an advocate for veterans. I'm not a veteran myself, but they use a phrase that you catch flack when you're over the target. So we knew that we were doing the right thing. And the Trump organization, we were an integral part of the campaign in South Carolina. And that South Carolina campaign had a few ups and downs with it, and it illustrated the difference between the MAGA and the establishment. And at that time, we were trying to bring those two groups together, the establishment GOP and the Republicans, under the idea of we need even 1% Republicans to show up and vote. We don't need to infight until after the election. Wait until the midterms to get your infighting. But we needed to get all the voters out without disenfranchising those that aren't 100% Republican, and to let them know it's okay to come and vote at the primary and to vote at the general election based upon your principles that you were raised with, not what you have adopted from TV, media, academia, or from the loudest idiot in the room wherever you spend your time. And that's kind of not how I phrased it, but that's generally where the more modern opinions come from, is from experience. And I would take the analysis and simplify things down to very simple uh, analysis of how does that work? How does that gel with different things? Now, because of that, we have been invited to Mar-a-Lago on several events, and we have joined forces with other groups like-minded, and we have done educational videos. We've done documentaries. I actually went with a film crew and a group of candidates in 23 to Eagle Pass, Texas, when that was the hot button open door. And we filmed from the Mexican side, we filmed from the American side, and we showed the people what was really going on. So they couldn't hide behind the media's portrayal of a snapshot edited for their best interest, but to show the candidates, or show the candidates themselves, so they could take that home and say, I've been there, I saw it. And we had some revelations as to what the immigration issue was. And I can direct you to the film itself, but I'm not trying to push that out. But what we found was that the issue wasn't between the United States and Mexico; it was the United States versus the world versus America. And it was eye opening because we saw some, or actually very few people that we saw were from Mexico. They came through Mexico, but they were not Mexicans themselves. So when we got to the 24 election, sorry to jump back and forth, we had a lot of fear that 2020 was going to happen again, and that there was going to be some abnormalities. There was going to be some cheating. There was going to be ballot harvesting that came up, and we had 4 years to prepare for what we believed the Democratic Party was going to try. Now, from 2020, we had investigations into everything. Mike Lindell's investigation had some, kernels of valuable truth to it. Michael Flynn, or General Flynn's investigations, and all these things came together. So we put together a playbook as to what we were expecting the Democrats to do, and it wasn't one thing. It was a little bit of everything. It was a little bit of ballot harvesting. It was a little bit of just outright fraud. But if they did everything everywhere, they could say any one of those things wasn't their mechanism. So we were on point as to what we were looking for, and I was invited as one of the attorneys in the state of Georgia to join the 100 Attorneys for Trump, and that was organized under the RNC and the Georgia GOP to participate in the election process. Now, I went door to door and I did the wearing out my shoes. I was part of the Trump Force 47 group. We did not want to lose an opportunity to have our hands and be participants in this election. So our people in all the different states and all the different chapters, we strongly urged them to participate in the Trump Force 47 ground machine. And then some of us that had a little bit, I would say, more expertise in the field started doing the poll watching and the tabulation centers watching that and oversight. And luckily in Georgia, we didn't have the same thing in 24 that happened in 2020. So the deterrent nature of us being present, one, was very annoying to the Democrats who were also there to observe. It was also very annoying to the poll staff who did not want to be viewed. They were very restrictive as to where we could be and what we could see, but we were still able to see what they were doing. And the opportunity for them to do some of the mechanisms that we believe that they use in 2020 were not available, or it would have been obvious. For instance, pulling suitcases out from under tables. Okay, now these tables have no skirts. Why have skirts? And making the tabulation centers and the polls themselves complied logistically with Georgia law. At the same time, while we're doing this, I'm fighting to get rid of these voting machines, these Dominion voting machines, to get back to paper ballots. And it's kind of burning the candle on both ends there to get back to a simplified election that's verifiable, that the people could trust, that has integrity to it. And part of what I did was have discussions. Okay. And there are some things I can't discuss, but we had discussions with other people in similar situations as to what are you seeing? What are you seeing? And we had a reporting network. So if something did happen, we knew exactly who to call, where it was going to go, and who needed to do what. And people were ready to mobilize and move and go and do what needs to be done, filing contempt actions, filing petitions, stepping in and uh, even documenting what we were seeing. And I hope, I hate to stutter over this. I don't want to take credit for anything, but I hope to think that all of our efforts collectively, between the lawyers that are advising and the other volunteers that we had, really made an impact to shut down the Democrats' fraud machine, because we as a country do not have the luxury of another 4 years of tyrannical administration. It's a refreshing moment where we're all a little giddy now, but we can't forget just a short while ago our First Amendment rights were stymied, our rights to attend church, our rights to our own children, the rights to have notice for our children being, susceptible to the mutilation from the transgenderism movement. And so many of our fundamental rights were on the hot seat and they were being denied, and we were starting to get used to it. They were normalizing the tyranny. And we want to keep that memory as our motivation to move forward, because although many of us kind of stopped after Trump got elected and we kind of took a deep breath and was like, okay, well, he's only going to be in office for 4 years, and we have a country to save until our children's children's children age out, and we want to keep fighting for our future of America.
Let me ask you this, and I think Donald Trump has even acknowledged this fact, that that pause between Trump's first administration and his second administration, that Joe Biden's administration and all of the evildoers behind him may have been the shock therapy that the nation needed to jump into action and start rounding up voters and pulling people who are not, it may be in that middle area, who we always fight for every year on national elections, start pulling those people in.
Yes, I hate the fact that we lost the 2020 election or it was stolen, but there is a silver lining there. Trump had 4 hours, not 4 hours, 4 years to plan, to do what needed to be done with the highest quality advisors under a constitutional republic basis. And Biden and Harris, their absurd platform, their absurd history, the lack of respect to the American people, the lack of respect to the law and the Constitution of the United States, and pandering to the victims and the non meritorious people of the world. I think it woke a lot. I hate to use the phrase woke or the term woke, but a lot of people had that smell test go up. They were aware. And Biden is a laughing stock, and Harris was like a hyena. And I think the Democratic Party imploded because what they were doing was making us all look very sane while they were going off and deep, looking for the fringe area and going to the far left groups. And we see remnants of that today, where we see the LGBTQ people siding with the pro-Hamas people. And as you know, there is no LGBTQ in Gaza. There is they don't tolerate that, and they refer to them as useful idiots if you hear them speak. But you're right that we had the time to perfect our motives and there are still some things out there that I'm aware of that are just coming up as to finding the power and the rights inherent in our Constitution to allow the executive branch to operate the way it was intended to operate. And we see that with the Supreme Court ruling in our favor concerning executive offices. And we're starting to see the limitation of district courts being able to enjoin our nation and enjoin the president himself, even though their jurisdictional difference is a small geographical area, is just a district within some state. The other thing that we're seeing is getting around the spending restrictions. So, and I'm hesitating about what I can speak about, but there is a tool called impoundment, and once again, this is one of these little known things to where the office of well, there is an executive office that makes decisions as to the final spending of money, and they can actually restrict it without acting in Congress, where the president used to be able to act on his own, and it turned out to be compared to a line item veto. But impoundment's quite a different thing. If it's something against the policy of the United States, against the policy and the Constitution, it's almost a duty at this point. And without speaking too much about things that should be coming up in the next month or two, I can speak about impoundment because they released an article on it a couple of weeks ago, or actually a couple of days ago. So that's a tool that we're going to use to make government efficient, to empower the Doge cuts to benefit all Americans. Because Doge itself it's an organization that once existed to update computers, and now they're acting as inspector generals across the entire executive branch, and we're getting the deep state fighting and fussing. They don't like it. So, one of the tools when they get a district court to enjoin someone right now, then we can go a different angle and just use the impoundment process through. Russ Vaught is the secretary of the Office of Management and Budget, and he would be the expert to speak as to exactly where he's going with that. But I'll tell you from knowing Russ Vaught and his experience, he's to be trusted with that. So um, that's kind of where I'm at with where we're going from here is to make America great again and making it a mandate of making America great again. It takes effort.
Well, we all knew there was government corruption, right? That was no surprise. We just wondered, would anybody actually even do anything about it? Now, we always had illegal immigration. Even the tidal wave that we saw during the Biden administration, I don't think really shocked anybody. It was very disheartening that they would do that to the country. But I think what terrified a lot of people, and maybe even people within your veterans organization, was the military and watching the ideological shift in the military and hearing some of the highest ranking officials in all of the branches start citing communist ideology and taking the military to the left. Now that terrified me and a lot of other people, because if you lose the military, you have lost just about all of it.
They did it under the guise of inclusion. And I spoke about this a while back about the U.S. military has been inclusive racially since the Revolutionary War. We actually have a lot of stories before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 where military integrated. They would be operating in a war campaign and they come home and they had a culture shock to where they had freedoms in the military that they didn't have at home, and they were trying to turn the military into a discriminatory group against the LGBTQ group. And we have a history of, don't ask, don't tell. And then it's tell everybody and deal with it. And now it was parades with blue hairs and trannies at drag shows on base, on aircraft carriers, and they were condoned by their superior officers because they felt like they had to toe the line. You're right, it scared a lot of us. But I think it's a product of prior to Trump's 2024 win, 12 of the last 16 years were with a Democratic administration. And during Trump's 4 years, he had his hands tied with lawfare and litigation at every single turn. He only had about 13 to 15% of following in the House and the Senate. So we worked on that. We got people to run that were MAGA, that we got the establishment people either to retire or get out of the way, or we challenge them. And with the 12 of the last 16 years, we had we normalized the oppression. And I think that the pandemic was also a test as to how much we're going to put up with. And I think we surprised the left by saying, we're not going to go back in our houses. You can't tell us we can't go to church. We're our children's parents. We will make decisions for our children. Our pursuit of happiness is not for you to determine. And many of us said, that's enough. That's my G rated version of that. But what we saw was that there were a large number of people who just took it. They thought that was the new normal. And they changed their ways to, I guess, adopt the oppression and then enforce it amongst themselves. Remember the mask Nazis, the people that, or the Karens that would go around and say, you're not wearing a mask, you're not wearing a. Well, all they had to do was start that snowball down the road, and then we have people acting on their behalf. And social media was tilted and all these things. With that being our reality, some of us that know the way it's supposed to be got off the couch, jumped off the sidelines, and started to not only get loud, but to educate the people. Because even if someone thought that the left, the Democrat Party, was doing good stuff, we had an opportunity to explain that what they were doing was harmful. And by the time we got to 2024, we had gotten a lot of people in both state houses and the U.S. House and the Senate trained, not trained, but messaging on the same point of the Make America Great Again. And not only just a slogan with a hat and t-shirt, but how are you going to do it? What do we need to do? So when we get to say the 22 election, we had not a red wave as we thought we were going to have, but we had a change of heart with the American people that made its way in under the 2024 red wave with Trump. And at this time, we have close to 60% support of the MAGA platform in the U.S. House and Senate. Granted, we know which ones are holdouts. We can't get everybody quite yet. But even those that are looking to be relevant, the last Republican holdout to make a bill pass, they know deep down that if they don't toe the line for the American people will replace them.
One of the big surprises in the 2024 election was the significant increase in the Hispanic male and Black male vote for Trump. And I do know that your organization is multicultural in nature. You do as an organization do any outreach to minority groups specifically to try to boost those numbers for Republican candidates?
Organization is diverse by nature because veterans themselves, first responders, they're automatically diverse because of the the applicants and the soldiers who were there. So we focused more on, I would say, messaging that applies to all people. And some of the messaging that we were suggesting for outreach really came back to universal messaging. And not to go down another, but when you have specific language used to market to a specific group, there's a certain part of disingenuousness that comes to it. And we didn't feel as though that we wanted to change our message for any one group because we all have commonalities. And I use the analogy of Christianity, that it's a universal message. And not saying that our platform is, equivalent with Christianity, but the model and the construct of our messaging, it's universal. And we did interact with different groups: Latinos for Trump, Blacks for Trump, Black Pac, and yes, we interacted with them, but we didn't step on their toes. We weren't trying to do what they were already doing. For instance, we partnered with some of those from the Frederick Douglass group, the Frederick Douglass Republicans, and we went to a seminar, and they were talking. They even had a couple of Democrats discussing how we should do outreach and how we should change our messaging for different demographics, so the Black community in Atlanta, for instance. And they were saying we should avoid using certain words here and there and here and there. But when we actually, stress test it with people, those demographics don't want to be talked to differently. They want to be spoken to the same way that we speak to everybody. And we found that um, if there is going to be a Frederick Douglass, he has to come from within a community, not from someone trying to penetrate a community as an outsider, because then you have defensive mechanisms, us versus them. So we did coordinate with some of the people who did targeted outreach, but we also focused on the universal language of this applies to all of us to build a American family, an American community. And in doing so, we did reach out to those people. So it's kind of counterintuitive that we didn't follow the experts as to how to speak to different minority groups, but by giving them the respect and avoiding the bigotry of low expectations and talking down to people, we empowered them to say, "I'm an individual, not a cog in a machine." The collective versus the individual was the universal message. And you don't pursue happiness as a collective. You don't exercise your rights as a collective. And if you are doing that, then your individual power has been diminished. You've given up your individual identity if you're just a cog in a machine. And we saw that with the Hispanic voters. We saw that with the black male population. And I also credit, I know we have an issue with the academia, but a lot of people were forced into or motivated to go to college, and believe it or not, they got educated. And some of the liberal education centers, universities, and colleges ended up teaching critical thinking unknowingly to the people they assumed were going to be liberal Democrats. And I went to a couple of classes where the professor was liberal, and it galvanized my perspective. And we saw that. I think that we as a people, and I said this by social media, we need to focus less on what we are instead of and focus more on who we are, because that's merit versus immutable traits. And we were told for how long that immutable traits do not matter. So they don't, and they never should. And those that do matter, they're using them for manipulation and management purposes to some degree. Now, in a campaign, you have a limited amount of time. So, yes, you have specialists who go into different communities, and you have specialists who are from that. But what we learned is it's more powerful to get a leader from that community to lead their community the right direction. And we saw that. We saw that with Alveda King. We saw that with Nicole, that she's part of the Right to Life group. But we saw people stand up, and if they needed a little bit of wind in their sail, we saw the Trump administration bring them to the stage to give them the podium. And it may have come off as a targeted message, but it was intentional to show that it's okay to be a Republican. It's not demonic. It's not, and then also to share the history, because we ended slavery, we ended the Jim Crow laws, we fought for the Civil Rights Act of '64 and '68, and most Republican voters, sorry, most, I'll say, black voters were unaware that the Republicans have done way more for the black community than the Democrats have. So there's a little bit of that history, but understanding that the speaker is just as important as the message itself, not by immutable traits, but positioning and who you are in that community. So if that is kind of a strange way of answering your question, but it happened with opposite effort, if that makes sense.
Sure. To your point on the speaker too, um, I'm often wondering because Trump was Trump. He never changed his tone. He never, if he was in the South, he was Trump. If he was in the Northeast, he was Trump. West Coast, he was Trump. He always remained steady in his speech and in his attitudes. He didn't try to do a fake conforming to whatever region of the country that he was in.
Right.
And I do know that a lot of people really appreciated that fact. They found him to be more genuine. And, I'm wondering, do you think because he was so different than what we have come to know as the traditional either state Republican, state elected official or federal elected official running for an office, do you think he's an anomaly and that we'll see some votes going down in certain demographics after Trump is gone?
That could happen, but I think that watching some of the other state races and seeing who's running and see who's winning in state GOPs and the tone of the Republican Party, those that are doing what Trump did are getting further. For instance, a couple of years ago at the Georgia convention, and I know it's a heated topic right now for the, the state GOP chair, but those who spoke when Trump came in 2022, 2023, I think it's 23, down to Albany, those that mimicked the tone, the genuineness, and the straightforwardness, they surprised us as to who won those races. And we saw that in state. And we're also seeing a less of the telling people what they want to hear because the people are wise to it. We're sick of it. I think there's a lot to be said that Trump did not code switch, as we refer to it in the legal community, to where you're trying to get, or you're manipulating an audience by trying to say you're one of them and trying to get that subliminal tribalism or that code switching. It comes off. You're from Georgia, right? How horrible is it to
I am.
watch a movie with a fake Southern accent? I don't care how good the
Yeah.
plot is. You don't want to hear that. Also, when you know it's a British actor, um, but it comes off very cheap and disrespectful. And what comes to mind the most is Hillary Clinton's comment about keeping hot
Oh.
sauce in her purse, and then AOC speaking to anyway, we've got a lot of experience with people doing that. And I think it was refreshing because it's easier to hear I'm in communications, I'm a trial attorney. And the best skill when I train young lawyers is to speak with the fewest words and mean the most. That's hard to get lawyers to say less. As you can tell, I kind of talk a lot. But when you have an important thing to argue, say the most with the very least because otherwise you're creating vagueness, and vagueness is a weakness in your argument. Well, when you have political platform discussions and you're speaking straightforward and you're speaking to the people straightforward and they're expecting nonsense, now they're surprised and elated. Their body relaxes and they can actually hear what's being said instead of the garbledygook, the word salad. I had the fun of watching all of the political speeches 4 or 5 times and taking notes and looking through them. And some of those that have audience cameras, it's funny to watch the faces of the audience when Kamala Harris speaks. Everybody's making a painful face because they were trying to figure out what in the heck she was saying. And by the time that she was done, it went from a painful look on their face to a bewildered look. Versus Trump, if they were angry, it's angry because they knew what he said and they disagreed with it. But you knew where he stood, you knew what he said, and you knew he was going to do what he was going to do. Now, all the people catching their hair on fire and running in circles because we're deporting people now, you must not have been listening because he said what we were going to do the whole time. And but talking about demographics, speaking to people, no matter where I've lived in the world, you don't change who you are if you are certain with who you are. And I tell my kids who are, 13 and 9, if you don't know who you are, then you'll certainly be somebody else. And they don't know what that means yet, but I'm letting them think about that. And we as a nation need to know who we are, and we need to keep that character to save our republic for our future.
One of the beauties of Trump, too, is he has a sense of humor. And especially if you're somebody like a Donald Trump who has been attacked from every angle possible, been called a Nazi, been called Hitler, been called every name in the book, racist, but yet he still has a sense of humor. And I think that does him so much good with his, at least with his base. It probably drives the far left people absolutely insane, but it does a lot for his base to keep them energized, because a lot of the base, you would imagine, would get very depressed and very discouraged watching this lawfare and these constant attacks and the misinformation that they provide on him and stuff like this. Uses that as a mechanism to keep them involved and keep them upbeat.
Yeah, you have to have some levity when you're speaking, because the Republican platform is boring because we're all about consistency and accounting and merit and all these things that aren't burning buildings. We're not slashing tires and trying to talk to police like they're fry 'em like bacon and stopping traffic and all this high energy. So I think Trump is very, very, I'll say, well scripted and putting it in the right place at the right time to one, annoy the crap out of the Democrats and the liberals, but also to humanize himself. So he comes across as Uncle Trump, or, some sort of, you have a relationship with him, because like John Kennedy, he's the funniest guy in Louisiana I could think of. Trump doesn't do as much colloquialism humor as he does because that's not who he is. He's a New York guy, and it would be disingenuous if he tried to mimic that. Um, but the idea of thinking of humor, it it gave him the chance to show power, right? And to laugh at those that are attacking him, the litigation against him, and behind closed doors. Anytime something bad happened, he was like, "Good, they got to talk about me. They've got to talk about me for the next 48 hours." That's free press. And when he had that mug shot, he said, "We're going to run on this. We're going to fundraise on this. We're going to make the most of this mugshot," and he did. And the people that were, I think, thinking that this was going to fall apart a million different ways, thought that they were in control of the messaging. Now, one thing that, looking in hindsight, that most people might not have been aware of, it's common in the legal field when you negotiate to try to you're jockeying for power. And if in a heated negotiation discussion where you present A, B, and C, if I respond A, B, and C, you're in control. If I say, I understand that you believe A, B, and C are important in that order, but I'm going to start off with B, C, and A. Now I'm in control of that conversation. And we saw Trump use that against the media over and over and over again. We saw him use that in debates. They'd ask him a question, and he'd say, I'm going to answer this other thing that you didn't ask me. I'm going to finish my question or the answer from the question that you cut me off on. And he was filling the blanks of the American people. And there's also a tool where if you try to jam something down someone's throat, they're not going to take it very easily. Versus you let someone reach their own conclusion. Now it's something of their own product. So you pose things in questions. You pose things on how does that work to you, and then you let it sit. You don't try to tell someone all these things, because we're not a bunch of idiots. People are going to gravitate to the solution that makes the most sense, especially if our policy is common sense, simplicity, and straightforward governance. There's a lot of intentional messaging from speech writing where he worked in the triplicate to say things three times versus negotiating with the media and arguing. He knows what he's doing. He's it, it's fun to sit back and to watch it because after watching so much of it, you kind of know where he's going to go, and he has that twinkle in his eye because he enjoys doing it, and that's something that we don't see with politicians. Looking at politicians who smile with a sincere smile, it's very rare. Most of them have this real stressed out. I'm not bad mouthing all politicians, but the idea that you can enjoy what you're doing and it's a sacrifice. All the slings and arrows that people wanted to throw at Trump for being a Nazi, a oligarch, or a billionaire that only looks after billionaire issues. You peel back one piece of the onion, and that doesn't make sense. It's a weak argument, and he's not superficial. He's always taking his messaging back to the core of small government, functional government, and getting rid of waste. And that really sits with the American people. A little humor helps too.
You know, I think an iconic landmark moment, in terms of the social entertainment world of things, you had an NFL, an iconic sport in the United States. They went from taking a knee during the national anthem to doing the Trump dance in the end zone after they scored a touchdown. I think you had shifts like that in the public forum that just said so much about the momentum that Donald Trump was able to create going into that 2024 election. It was just phenomenal that you could go from knee down on a knee to the anthem to doing the simulated Trump dance after you scored a touchdown. That was meaningful to me in terms of what it represented.
We still have that begrudging segment of our population who refuses to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. They refuse to stand for the anthem. They refuse to stand for this. But what I'm seeing in the crowd, because I'm a people watcher, I'm seeing that everyone else looking at them and them looking either defiant or very uncomfortable. Even at local high school and middle school events, I'm seeing that angle, that perspective is not the majority of people aren't gravitating to that. Now, me personally, I stopped watching the NFL when they started kneeling. And I was a long term NFL season ticket holder. I had several of them in the good seats. And I said, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to put up with that. And I'm not going to pad their pockets. But you're right. When I saw the end zone dance when they were doing and I'm going to do it too right here. That gave me chills, and I watched the next football game. Now we still have the pride flag and all the transgender nonsense in the end zones that kind of have nothing to do with football. Um, might skew the cheerleaders a little bit, but nevertheless, we still have that, and that I believe is also dwindling away as a normal thing, and we see that with different baseball teams now also boycotting Pride Month, and that's a relief because there's nothing relating to baseball, and they're just trying to jam it down our throat and normalize it. Um, and I think the American people are sick and tired of being sick and tired of that. Tolerance is something that you don't like, right? Acceptance is something that you accept. And we got to a point where we're like, we're not going to tolerate that because we'll never accept.
Well, President Trump, he tapped Doug Collins for Veterans Affairs. Um, have we seen any positive movement related to veterans in the Trump administration thus far?
Yes. And what we're seeing right now is, well, we're not seeing a lot right now because the first bit of what has to happen is to figure out how broken it is. And the VA has so many segments and so many things that need to be fixed that they're getting their footing underneath them and they're finding fraud lots of different ways. For instance, there's a a certain director who is relying on outside uh, NGOs to provide essential services for the VA district in which he slash she slash they um, were in charge of. And they also had the budget in their own coffers to pay for those services, but they relied on NGOs to provide those. So you have the double dip effect. We have those types of wasteful spending. And we also have, I'll say, tyrannical operators at different levels that are being discovered, that are operating not for the best interest of the soldier and the veteran, but as this power grab. Because our veterans are, they have made the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate risk, and they have made a deal for these resources that they've been denied. Now, Doug Collins is the right man for the right job, or Secretary Collins is the right man for the right job, because he knows from being a lieutenant colonel himself and understanding that the higher rank officers are so disjointed from the grunts in the field, the enlisted, that they go off on these tangents of LGBTQXYZ or DEI or the 1619 project being added to the curriculum at the different academies, and they felt as though that they could do these projects. Um, well, now that's not going to be the case. There are no more nonsensical things in our plan. And I think that once we get the VA operating the way it was intended to be, we can maximize quality of treatment, maximize quality of care, coordinating the Make America Healthy Again group with our RFK and the victory gardens that are, have been a big part of our American culture, and incorporating that with veteran housing instead of pandering to the illegal immigrants who are here for who knows what reason, or for anti-American reasons like the Molotov cocktail guy in Boulder, Colorado. All the resources that have been pilfered by those less meritorious, there's a zero sum there. And I think that once we get or Collins gets his grip on what the problem is, he's going to be straightforward in fettering out those who are not there for the right reason. Now, the Supreme Court just came down and empowered Trump to remove executive officers without a lot of oversight. And I think that Doug Collins will take advantage of that to get rid of those that are actually harming the veterans. Because the two things with veterans that we have to fight with are homelessness and suicide. Those stem from mental health and lack of resources. And if we can get the mental health for the veterans figured out, in addition to the best practices for medical health, non mental, but physical health for prosthetics and rehab, so they don't get just medicated and then hooked on drugs and then down that path of homelessness and suicide. We owe it to them. We owe it to them. That's one of the biggest things that I fight for, is to keep veterans alive, to show them that they have meaning and purpose. Because if we're going to have a hierarchy of citizenry, they're not at the bottom of the chain. They're not at the bottom of the chain. And we need to respect them and give them what they need, because they made the deal, and now it's the federal government, you know, failing them.
Well, locally here in Georgia, um, House bill in this past session, House Bill 266 made it through, and the governor signed off on it. You want to give us a little summary about what that entails?
Yes. Prior to the House Bill 266, the exemption for veterans under 65 for their taxation on their military income was only $17,500 per year. And this bill 266 increased that exemption to $65,000, which is a very meaningful thing for people living on fixed incomes. A lot of our veterans are dependent upon a lot of medical care, and that's going to free up some money. If they couldn't afford some specialty treatment or holistic treatment that's otherwise not covered by TRICARE or whatnot, then they can look for those opportunities and maybe experiment or find what works for them. And the I think it's a beginning of a great thing to treat veterans with the respect that they deserve and to give them a hand up. It's not a handout, but a hand up. So when they do come back from military service and they're transitioning into civil business and the domestic world, they can have a little bit of a wiggle room here, and to give them, it's almost a, in my opinion, this is just Georgia, but to give them back what was taken from them, if that makes any sense. Um, and I have to commend Governor Kemp on that because I didn't expect it to go through so quickly, and I expected to get to. I thought it was going to get amended back down to $25,000, but keeping it at 65,000, that was a great thing.
Hey, your organization has six platforms and areas that you're working on. Can we just hit each one of them and just let me know if there's something that you're doing in those areas?
Well, I'll tell you that what I've been focusing on is the messaging on the federal elections, right? But our organization, starting off in 2015, that predates me, it started off with the pillars that we were originally boots on the ground, where we were focusing on homelessness. We were looking at medical. We were looking at mental health. We were looking at dietary. We were looking at vocation, also criminal justice, and the handling of veterans differently than the general population for violations of the law. But our organization took a turn where the national group was focused more on politics. And the political pedestals that we were just going through, those are how we vet our candidates at the national level. We ask them, what is your stance on red flag laws, privacy rights, medical, mental health, all these different things. So the national uses those pedestals as a means of finding the good candidates that we're going to endorse. And it was our intention that the state chapters would be more boots on the ground and go out and find resources for medical treatment to do more boots on the ground as the national group started off with. And we had some states that did different things for different vets because that's what they intended to do. Pets for Vets was something that was floated at one point. Also, I've been in partnership with the tiny homes, mighty homes, and the different groups, the Tunnel to Towers group, and the Veterans National Parade. So even though I'm not doing the boots on the ground work, and I'm in the political realm, we're still coordinating with the groups that are doing the boots on the ground, providing, benefits to the veterans, the flood victims. That was another thing that some of the North Carolina, South Carolina groups were doing, was providing the generators and things. And we weren't trying to take credit for that. We were, I think, looking at that as a true charity is one where you're not trying to take credit, and we were more happy, or we're sorry, we were happier to get the products to the recipients instead of waving our banner of look at us. And we have networks of people who are ready to go. We have a database of veterans that we can mobilize not only for political purposes to show up at polls and do what I was mentioning before in 2024 election, but to organize interest-based events. If you have a group of veterans in Tennessee that are in need of something different than what would be in Florida or Georgia, then we're not going to try to jam what works in Florida into a Tennessee solution. But that's kind of how the pillars have evolved over time from the national organization to the state organizations, and some of the state organizations have gone and I'll say done some things that the national organization would not have done. But with that being said, I won't speak too much about tensions interorganizational because that's not really newsworthy, by the way. But the pillars are, from my perspective, a way of vetting the grassroots or the MAGA candidates to show that they are who they say they are, and then we prod them a little bit more to see if they're full of it or not.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you vet them, and then you've also got to hold them accountable once they give you the message that you're looking for.
And we tell them that, "Well, just because we endorse you this race does not mean that we're going to endorse you in the next race. Because if we have a veteran who steps in a race where there's a non-veteran and the veteran's he passes vetting, well, we're going to put a thumb on the scale to get the veteran in. And if we don't have a veteran in the race, we have a first responder, and they're more MAGA minded than the other, we're going to opt for the first responder." And down that line of reasoning, to have those that are representing us at whatever level invested in the American citizenry, invested into the community and culture of America and their home environment.
Well, hey, before we conclude, I want to take a step to the side too. You provided legal representation for Jake Lang. Could you tell us who Jake Lang is and kind of how that process worked?
Yes, Jake Lang is one of the J6ers who was pardoned right after the inauguration. And the moment after the inauguration, we all saw Trump run in and sign all these executive orders. And Jake Lang is one of several J6ers that was being refused release. And you had state actors and state facilities that were operating on behalf of the federal government to house some of these J6ers who were ignoring the pardons and holding the J6ers in the facilities, the state facilities or the private facilities, for unrelated things. For instance, one was concerning, that someone had a gun at their home, and now their felony record won't allow them. So we're going to keep them in jail, incarcerated for an indefinite amount of time. And that reason kept changing over and over and over again. Well, I was on the way back from the inauguration. I was part of the Trump bus armada. We traveled in a caravan of 7 Trump buses wrapped with MAGA all up and down the sides of them. And we left the inauguration and we were headed back to Georgia. And I had so many requests for me to step up and to call everybody within my network to get Jake Lang out. And Jake Lang had been ignored in solitary confinement for the majority of his time. He was abused and beaten and denied access, denied due process, denied access to his lawyers. You name it, Jake Lang had experienced it. He saw so many other J6ers falling into this demise, and he used the power of Scripture and the message of Jesus Christ and Christianity to create a prayer circle and a daily prayer, and to bring the J6ers together in those facilities to have hope that eventually this was going to work. They were going to be released and justice was going to be had. And knowing that about Jake Lang and hearing that he was being denied, I jumped on the phone and contacted everybody within my power. I'm not sure which phone call worked. I'm not sure if my phone call was the feather on the camel's back that pushed it over. But I at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was sending somewhere between 50 and 60 emails, text messages, voicemails, because no one wants to talk to me at 3 in the morning. Well, unless depends on where they're at. Um, and trying to get him released. And by noon the next day, after I got back and I slept in because it was a long ride, by the time I woke up and got, back in social media, Jake Lang had been released. And then he started fighting to get others released. And we see even today more J6ers that are still incarcerated under state related charges or trumped up nonsense as an affront to Trump being elected. Now, over 100 days later, they're sitting there with a federal pardon. Our work is not over. That's not normally what I do. That's not normally my function. But with Jake Lang, I felt as though the number of people that were calling me from all over the state of Georgia and all over the Southeast to see what I could do, I felt like they were relying on me, and I couldn't just simply go lay down and go to sleep. I had to fight to get Jake out. And now we see that the J6ers all have so many different unique stories, But the commonality is they were denied their rights as Americans. They were denied the due process and of American citizens. And we hear so much with due process now when we're talking about deporting the illegal aliens. But the Supreme Court didn't even talk about due process with the J6ers. They refused to hear anything, and that was disheartening. But now I realize we won. We've got Trump in office. We can actually fight to get these defendants out because these defendants are serving 4 year, 5 year sentences for misdemeanors, or they haven't even been charged yet, or they're being held without bond, or they're being held in solitary confinement, and their food's been poisoned. They've had unspeakable things done to them and their food. And Jake Lang just represents one of those people that was trying to hold people together while so many were slipping into depression and slipping into self loathing and self harming because they didn't have any other option to get out than to harm themselves. And I have to commend Jake Lang on taking upon himself to give hope to those and to spread the message of Jesus Christ to give them a sense of this is bad now, but it will be better later, and to have faith in the system.
Well, Jared, if I'm a first responder or a veteran in Georgia, is the best way to get in touch with your organization through your website?
GeorgiaVFAF.us is our website. You can also contact us. We are under some maintenance on our national website of VFAF.us. But either which way, you can go to the websites and contact us through a email portal or any of the phone numbers there. They go to various members of our organization. And social media, we don't hide, we're all over the place. You can friend us on social media and follow us on Twitter, where we do spaces regularly. The next month or two we're going to pick that back up, and we want input, we want the success stories. Not only are we trying to right the wrongs of the past 4 years, of the past 12, or the past 16 years, but we have to remind ourselves that we have the opportunity to fix things, and best practices come together when diversity of thought is used, not diversity of immutable traits. And our organization, it's straightforward because we're all volunteers. We're not trying to chase up some corporate ladder. There's some of us that have been tapped and appointed for different positions, and great. But that's not. We're not doing this for positioning. If that comes about, great. Whatever. I'll contemplate it if there's an offer. But nevertheless, I'm still drafting legislation. I'm drafting legislation for state and federal levels to ensure the MAGA, I'll just say, uh, platform and the policy of benefiting citizens who are valuable versus illegal aliens that want to harm us. So we still are working, and there's a lot of us behind the scenes that are organizing things, and we're joining forces with the right people at the right time for the right reason.
Well, we'll put your links in our description that you've given us. And Jared, I can't thank you enough for your passion, what you do, and thanks for giving us some time.
Thanks, Steve. Anytime you need me, give me a call.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Jared Craig. Um, if you know any veterans, first responders, have them look at their website. We'll put it in the description here. It's a great way for them to advocate for the issues that matter the most to them and to look out for legislation that really helps them in their daily lives. And we appreciate all our first responders and all our veterans. If you would, hey, like, subscribe, and share this content, please. Give it to a veteran or a first responder that you know. They may find this very interesting, and they may find the organization that Jared works for very, very helpful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.